Oh, hello, Simon.
Hi, Samaya. How are you doing?
Fine. Good to see you. How are you?
Yeah, doing good. Kind of busy right now.
Ah,
Just
so
started a
you're,
new job. How are you doing?
oh, how it's going? I hope you're doing well with it.
Well, it's early days. It was only a couple of weeks ago, so um, just getting my head around everything.
Yeah, you will get over it. You're a strong guy, and yeah, you will do it.
Oh,
So you are the organizer for this?
yes.
Oh, that's why you are the first to come.
No, I'm just a little early, just because I wanted to catch up with Ruth before we got started.
Good.
So,
I hope you have a good. How many participants you might expecting this?
I 10 maybe.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
something like that. It's a little bit of a niche subject, and this is a Boston chapter meeting, so um, we've opened it up to a lot of other people, but we'll see. We'll see who comes along.
Yeah, I read the summary about the webinar. It's quite interesting, actually.
No, it is. It really is, especially in like uh, times like this. We'll see if we'll have to get Sam to talk a little more about what he's seeing in terms of current changes in demographics. But it's in the Boston area. It's turned things on its head. I mean, we moved out to the countryside
Yeah.
2 years ago, and we were kind of like we were the crazies. Um,
Mm.
and now it looks like a stroke of genius. But
Yeah.
the Boston rental market has collapsed. Prices are way down.
Yeah.
Occupancy is way down. The colleges are going back, but even then, some of them are going back virtually. So, if you are an apartment owner in Boston, you're probably hurting a bit right now.
Mm. Yeah, people are not intending to spend so much these days.
Yeah, people don't want to be in the city if they can, if they have a choice. So, people are fleeing the city for, you know, bigger space.
Quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, more quiet area, or like they need a peace of mind.
Right. So, when Sam told me about their capabilities, I thought, well, that's really interesting. It'd be good to see that in action. So, what I've asked them to do is just to do a very simple presentation of a couple of anonymized examples of what they've done before for clients. We
Yeah.
don't need to know the client name. Keep it general. But what was the process they went through, and what conclusions did they reach, and why? Um, so, picking a location is it's a
Yes.
pretty big decision, and it's difficult to reverse. So you want to make sure you get it as
The right.
right as you can first time around.
True. Also, it's good to know the mentality of the people nowadays, and when they are thinking about to own their own real estate or their own apartment.
Hmm.
That's why it's always good to know what's going on in the people minds.
Sure.
I know a lot of people that they are running away from cities just to have a bigger space and more peaceful mind.
Yep.
They don't mind to drive a little bit longer to their work every day, but that they need a peaceful place and a bigger space.
Yep. So how are things with you?
Oh, still not really moving so fast, or like no progress. The market is really very dull and the country is still closed.
Hmm.
Very, very, very slowly opens, and they put a lot of restrictions for traveling. So, I really wish that I can have a good contract outside. This is my main target. I'm really so eager to have a good contract outside the country. But until now, the whole region is not really so promising.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hey, Sam.
Oh, I think he's muting.
He is muted,
Yeah.
but his mouth isn't moving, so he's not talking yet either.
Yeah.
Hi, Simon.
Hey, Sam. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, good. It's a little warm here today, but hanging in there.
That it is.
We're just waiting for Ruth to join so that we can do a quick test of the.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So I have here, it's 11 p.m. and usually at this time I'm sleeping.
Well, thank you, Samaya. So Samaya is joining us from the Middle East, Sam.
Oh,
Oh, hi,
not too
Sam.
often that I talk to someone who's halfway across the world.
Oh, please, anything you need to know, I'm ready. It's my pleasure always.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Okay.
So Simon, the plan is that we're going to share my screen.
Okay.
So I've kind of cleaned up all of my open windows, but we're going to use some slides in PowerPoint and then pivot to like a web-based.
Sure. Whatever works. I think Ruth just needs to make you presenter, and then we're off to go. But I want to thank you and Julia for joining us, Sam. I know you're a busy man. You're slammed right now, so appreciate you taking a bit of time out to show us some of your capabilities. We're just waiting for people to turn up, which always is a bit slow. So they'll come in drips and drabs, unfortunately. And if any other meeting proves to be a guide.
Do you have an idea of expected attendance for the presentation?
I think about 12, something like that.
Okay, great.
Yep. So I was making phone calls at lunchtime, trying to drum up some extras.
I appreciate that.
But what we can do, Sam, is we'll record it.
Yep.
And if you're okay with it, we'll put it up on our website for all members to be able to view subsequently. So
let me just double check with Julia that there's nothing proprietary there that we can't share. It's on the surface level, it's fine with me, but
yep, absolutely. Whatever if you're comfortable, we can do that. If you're not, we can cut that out.
Okay, yeah, I will. I'll let you know. Let me have an offline with her afterwards, and I'll let you know.
Sure.
My guess is it's the type of thing you might be able to send around, but maybe not post on the website.
Yeah, it would be inside our paywall, so it would be for members only.
Okay.
Not for the outside world.
Right. Okay.
Where's Ruth? She's normally here by now. Oh, as we've seen. So here's our esteemed chairman, who's also from the Boston area.
Hey, Simon.
Hey, Wasim. We're waiting for Ruth, Wasim. She seems to be a little behind the curve.
Okay.
So is that your Raytheon work background you've got there?
That's one of my toys.
Excellent.
Can I have one?
You can.
And Peter's on the beach.
Yes, I decided to go on the beach today.
Well, I think you've earned that right, Peter.
Oh, I got to figure out this system yet. Yeah, that's better.
Peter, I don't think I've seen you without a beer.
Well, let's put it this way: without a beer or beer.
Beer.
Oh well. How about this one?
There you go.
I'm just going to ping Ruth. She must be hung up on something.
Hey, Samuel, are you a member of the Massachusetts group, Boston Chapter?
I'm not. I'm one of the two presenters.
Oh,
Fantastic.
well, in that case, why don't you become a member too? Kidding.
Here's Julia.
Hey, Ruth. Doing good. Are you joining us? You don't have to if you don't want to. We can. I was just expecting you to help, just so that we can make sure that Sam is up to speed to be able to screen share and that kind of thing. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Sam. I think that Ruth forgot she was supposed to hold your hand on the screen sharing.
No problem.
So give her a second and she'll be on.
Hey, Headley, how you doing?
Well, packed and ready to go if the fires get any closer.
I was just going to say, I mean, when I saw you here on the listing, I said, well, I guess the fire hasn't quite hit yet, or he's doing it from the car.
Yeah, how far are you from the fire, Headley?
Well, too close, too close because the evacuation warning is in effect
Oh, man.
until we get an evacuation order, which hopefully we want. We were evacuated for almost 6 weeks in 2017 because of the Tubbs fire, and again last year for 2 weeks. And then 2018, it was the floods. So we're kind of waiting for the bugs to arrive here anytime.
So if I remember right, you're up in Sonoma. Right?
I'm up in Santa Rosa. We're up in wine country, yes.
There you go.
So Ruth, can you make
Yes.
Sam the presenter, please? How do we do that?
Sure. Sam, you're not able to share?
I haven't tried
You have
yet.
to- Okay, click on share screen
Okay.
and then select, yep. And then you're just going to select actually the slides. But I thought, okay, there you go. And then just put them in presentation mode, bottom right, you'll see near the slider. There you go.
Hi, Ruth. How
Just a
are you?
question for Julia, because she had, I gave her my link. Julia, can you hear me? There we go.
Looks like Julia's muted.
Yeah, here, Julia, you're muted. Let me see if let me unmute you. There you go. No. You're still, there you go.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
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 We can even see you.
Always a fun technology challenge for me.
Well, thank you, Julia and Sam. Really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. So just to introduce everybody on the call, I've known Sam for a while now. I think we first met 8 years ago when he pitched, when he was working for another company. Didn't win that pitch, but we've been in touch since, and we've finally started our first assignment together. So Sam is somebody who's always willing to give up his time for any real estate question, and he's in it for the long haul, as the fact that it's taken 8 years for us to do our first deal, Sam has testified. So Sam is the Senior Vice President at JLL in the Boston office, and he is, he's my contact for our current search. And Julia is the Senior Vice President and Director of Research in the same office. And I thought this would be an interesting presentation because what these guys are doing is bringing analytics to the decision of where you locate your premises. And particularly today when things are in such flux, that could be incredibly useful. I know, Sam, you and I have had conversations about people fleeing the city. So I'd be very interested to hear your insights as to what's going on. And to show us your capabilities, because I think it's not an area that a lot of people think that analytics can be applied, and clearly you guys have got ahead of the curve there. So without ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Simon, for the kind introduction, and thank you everybody in the IERG group for joining us this afternoon. As Simon referenced, I'm a Senior Vice President here in the JLL Boston office. I spend the majority of my time representing and advising corporate users with their space search, their negotiations, their occupancy strategy, etc. Julia, as Simon alluded to, heads our research group here based out of Boston, and increasingly the transactional specialists like myself work hand in hand with Julia to really craft optimal occupancy strategy scenarios for our clients. So what we're going to run through with you today is sort of a sample of the type of exercise that we typically go through with a lot of our clients. Of course, every company and organization's needs are a little bit different, but we thought we'd give you a little bit of flavor of what our capabilities are. I'm going to kick it over to Julia in a minute, but really at a high level, what we thought we would do is just start a little bit with sort of a macro, state of the union from a real estate perspective, which Julia will handle. And then we're going to dig into a couple of examples of actual, I call them sanitized type examples where we've taken client logos off, and just give you a feel for the type of exercise that we run on behalf of our clients ahead of our more typical real estate process. And the reason we really have evolved our business is the world has changed dramatically around us, and the way people make decisions has changed dramatically. But real estate, and especially site selection and occupancy decisions, is historically a fairly analog process, right? And our industry has really been one of the last to adapt to sort of the new world in terms of how folks make decisions. So we've tried to bring a more analytical approach to decision making. You'll see through some of our slides here that some of the data may bear assumptions that you may or may not have already had, and sometimes it'll create demonstrate new information that perhaps that you hadn't considered. But in the former example, at the very least, if you had an idea or a notion or an understanding of or expectation that a trend may be taking place, or one location may be better than another for a certain reason, we've actually put data behind it. So our thought is, when our clients are having discussions with us and they're taking a recommendation to their executive team or to a business unit or to the board, or if they're publicly traded, to the street and the analyst community, there's data behind it, rather than just sort of a notion or a gut feeling. So we've tried to really elevate the game. We're going to try to keep it relatively simple here. And JLL is an enormous company. We're one of the world leaders in the commercial real estate services industry. We have about 90,000 employees worldwide. Any type of advisory type service, we have a hand in one way or another, and we're not going to get into any of that, but really try to keep it myopically focused, on site selection and our analytics and, the capabilities and processes that we work with our clients to help them with their upfront planning phase of any type of real estate transaction. So with that, I'm going to turn the conversation over to Julia to sort of run through some of these this early sort of trend slide, and then we're going to dig into some examples and some of the tech. So Julia, take it away.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks everybody for having us today. It's certainly been an interesting time for all of us, and real estate has, as Sam has mentioned, has become a lot more about strategic business decision making, and not simply about cost and location, although that certainly remains a factor. But a couple of the things that we are looking at, if you flip ahead, I think to the next slide after that, are, how do you address the real estate and the workplace in this current environment, and how much has it changed as it relates to the pandemic? And what I will say is kind of the overarching theme is that a lot of the trends that you see here are actually trends that we had been discussing prior to the pandemic, which I would say is good news, because it means that the way that people were thinking about their real estate before this does not significantly shift in light of this situation. Of course, we are taking more care and attention to the health and well-being of everybody, but this idea of a distributed workforce had started to emerge over the last couple of years, mainly a function of high growth innovation markets that had become supply constrained from a labor perspective, as well as from a real estate perspective, that was creating a whole kind of cascade of conditions, including just higher costs, more congestion, more competitive real estate conditions. And we had started to see a lot of tech and innovation companies start to spread out from their headquarters locations to the benefit of a lot of other markets, which dovetails a little bit into the urban versus suburban question, which I think became probably a little bit too definitive over the past 10 years in favor of the urban environment. And really what we had been seeing leading up to this crisis is that there was a lot more recognition of the kind of holistic approach to real estate and talent that dictated, you know, a different type of mindset around what strategies would and wouldn't work. So the urban versus suburban, and similarly with the distributed work, we're thinking a little bit more about a hub and spoke model and how do you tap into different talent pools based on where they're located versus where the headquarters is located. Separately, but I think important is the idea of work from home and you know, what the actual workplace looks like, and those will certainly play a factor in real estate decisions moving ahead. But when we think to what was really driving a lot of the decision making over the past 10 years, it was trying to find dense clusters of talent. And what you see here are the top cities in the country for share of millennial populations. And that really did drive a lot of, you know, innovative and expansive real estate decisions for companies over the past 10 years. But, you know, as we're starting to look at life cycle changes and the natural progression of how a person wants to live and work, you know, we are starting to see that the aging millennials are moving to the suburbs. And that has been especially validated during this crisis, with a lot of young families starting to accelerate maybe their first home purchase as a result of this crisis, but not different from any plans they may have had before this, just a little bit more sped up. So, you know, taking all those things into consideration, that makes you think a little bit differently about what your real estate portfolio could or should look like, and starting to segment out by where do you need different groups of people and where do they work best to enable the sustainability of, you know, good financial performance for the business, but also maintain the growth and innovation that a lot of companies are seeking today. So what you see here is kind of pairing those groups with the real estate, where you've got executive leadership and innovation teams focused on maybe those urbanized clusters where there's a density of talent to pull from, but then you've got different functions working in different locations based on what the needs and the clustering of the talent dictates. And I include this Harvard study, which was released in late 2019 and was timely, but they found that the collaboration of people was most predominant if you worked on the same floor versus working in the same building, which kind of dispels the myth that every single person needs to be in a mega headquarters location. And I think that that's a notable distinction to make, because there was this idea that everybody needed to be completely urbanized and completely located in one area. Now we're starting to have that conversation about the hub and spoke and urban versus suburban. So taking that, you know, looking a little bit differently, you can start to see how the segmentation of markets works from a pricing and availability perspective, with urban markets the most expensive and the most supply constrained. So thinking about, do we need to have everybody there if we are facing supply constraints and even talent constraints? You know, leading up to the crisis, Boston had a sub 3% unemployment rate, which is one of the lowest in the country. So thinking about that, and what do you need to enable your company to continue growing? So this is kind of that progression of maybe segmenting business units within one company. And then moving ahead, you know, so I mentioned talent a lot. That has dictated a lot of the expansion activity from big tech companies in particular, and that has driven a lot of growth across the country in primary markets first and foremost, but then trickling down to secondary and tertiary markets even. And what you see here is a metric that we utilize a lot with technology clients, just understanding where is the momentum taking place from an employment perspective because they want to locate in markets where there's a proven track record for growth. And this is just one of the metrics. I think if we go to the next slide, you'll see this is a sampling of an actual requirement for a client. They are based in San Francisco, but were needing to expand and finding it highly competitive in the market, and wanted to find a market that was lower cost from a labor perspective and real estate perspective, but less competitive from a hiring perspective. And you can see here the handful of location criteria that we utilized when looking at markets that would fit their needs. And on the next slide, you'll see that we have the actual output. So we went in and we pulled together all of the talent data that was critical to them. They wanted to understand software developers more specifically, but really the cost considerations were more important to them for this particular expansion opportunity. And understanding not just lower cost, but understanding where can you get lower cost, but a good quality of living. That was definitely important. And we hear that often with our clients, that not only want to find a lower cost option or a high density talent option. You know, if you're thinking about us here in Greater Boston and the life sciences sector, but really thinking about what is a market that's going to have all the attributes that creates stickiness for our talent, because we are thinking about long-term expansion and not short-term needs. So they're dynamic conversations, which is good because you really can hone in on what's important to the client and start to really customize the real estate strategy that meets their specific business needs.
And Julia, if I can just add to that. So I think this slide's a good opportunity just to sort of stop and press pause for a second. So for those of you on the call that have run, real estate processes in the past, oftentimes your location strategy is as simple as, where's my CEO live? Where is my CTO? If we're in the life sciences space, are we receiving funding from a particular organization, or is science being completed within a particular hospital environment, for example? Or it could be as simple as where, if you're VC or PE backed, where your investors want you to be, right? But what we're seeing increasingly is real estate is kind of the proverbial, the tail that's being wagged by the labor dog, right? So with labor now sort of dictating real estate strategy, and labor, specifically the scarcity of labor within certain components of the market, is requiring people to be a little bit more scientific in terms of where they locate. I think some of us have an idea where some of these pockets of talent do live, and it could be as simple as understanding where some competitors are, where you may have worked in the past. But there's also a lot of other factors that go into these business decisions. It's what are we paying these people in salary? What type of advanced degrees do they have? Is the salary ranges, are they increasing? Are they decreasing? Or if we're looking to hire more millennials, not only where are they, but is that particular segment of the population, is that accelerating? And certainly real estate costs, availability, even tax increment financing and state incentives, that's all a component of it. But
so Sam and Julia, is this correct that Boston has the highest median home sales price out of any of these metropolitan areas that you looked at?
No, it's a good question. Actually, in fact, Silicon Valley outranks all of them. I think.
Oh, there it is. Sorry.
Yeah, if you
we're second.
So the cost of living is high in the major centers of talent and innovation. I will say that when we're having a conversation about the Boston marketplace, thinking about that relative to other innovation markets, the urban core is dense. But when you start to expand out in different directions, you do find pockets of relative affordability that you don't find in places like the New York, Manhattan specifically in many parts of the New York metropolitan area. Same thing for Silicon Valley and San Francisco. Anywhere within Silicon Valley and San Francisco metro areas, the median home value is over $1 million.
So this is interesting. So is Silicon Valley on this chart? I don't see it, right? So
we did not include it because they were coming from San Francisco. So we, in this particular client engagement, we used it as a benchmark to pricing, but we didn't use it as an option for expansion.
right. I find it interesting because I would have expected the home area to be on it, right? So you can then do a comparison from San Fran to New York or whatever it is. But that's interesting, right? I suppose the other side,
yeah, we did.
If you don't mind, was I take it this was based on software. If you wanted to do life sciences, you would have a different set of numbers.
Yep. Yeah, we can look at down to very granular occupation data. So that was for software developers. We can look at biomedical engineers. We can look at lawyers. We can look at basically any occupation. And what we try to do is determine the concentration of those, not just in sheer numbers, which is important for scale, if that's what the company is trying to achieve, but also for the clustering element that is really important for, companies that are trying to understand, do they have an ecosystem? And what you're looking at here, actually, I think is a good representation of this company was looking for a fintech ecosystem that created kind of that environment of a cluster, and coming from San Francisco, where you see the bulk of venture capital funding flowing for fintech, but also New York, Boston, and Atlanta, surprisingly, are also capturing significant amount of fintech VC funding. So we use that as one of the metrics to show momentum in addition to employment.
And where I think the data is really valuable is, and I think that everyone on this call knows that, there's certainly a concentration of the type of talent that this particular client is looking for in San Francisco, and in, Southern California. But there may not necessarily be an idea of, what the availability of that talent looks like in Dallas or Salt Lake City. So when you start getting into the nuances of, hey, what are my options and how do we quantify that? That's really where this analysis shines. And for many of our clients, they're really trying to make a business case for, decision, A, B, or C. And if, they know that, the cost of talent, real estate, or availability of talent, or lack of, is presenting a problem to their business, that's where this analysis really can be useful to say, okay, well, we know that, we could work in San Francisco or New York, but, that presents certain problems. What are our alternatives? And more importantly, how do we quantify it? Because increasingly, it's understanding, not only where these people live, but also how close you are to them and how to, get them to your workplace. And one of the things that COVID has really revealed, I think, to a lot of us, holy cow, we waste an enormous amount of time every single day on both the front and the back end in commuting. And when we're commuting from our bedroom to our home office, in some senses, we're a little bit more efficient. So, to Julia's earlier point, a lot of the data that we have here in the process that we're running, didn't start after COVID. We were already doing and running these type of models for clients, but COVID has certainly accelerated it. So this particular slide, I'll let Julia jump in and narrate here, is really an interesting, interesting juxtaposition of software programmers in the state of Massachusetts, specifically the greater Boston metro. Oftentimes the conception might be, listen, you need to be in a brick and beam building in the seaport, or in the Back Bay to recruit a lot of these people. But when you do an analysis of really where they live, you'll see that the heat map, varies considerably from where they live and where they work. So.
Yeah, I think your point is really well made, Sam, and I think what we try to do for our clients is arm them with all this information so that way they can make data-driven decisions that they feel confident with. And Sam mentioned this earlier, if there is a board of directors or a leadership committee that needs to be given this information to either approve decisions or make decisions with people. You know, all of this helps make it a much more transparent and, I would say, empowering process for everybody to know that they're making the best decision possible. So, you know, Sam alluded to earlier, we have learned a lot, I think, just through this crisis of, you know, challenges of moving people around and how people get to work versus, you know, the time it takes to get to work. And this is an example of a commute analysis that we performed for a client, and, you know, looking at their current location in Boston versus what the center of gravity looks like as it relates to where all their employees live. And you can see the different shades of beige are higher density of employee concentrations. So when you start to think about over the long term for a real estate decision, one of the elements of, you know, making a good real estate decision is where does that talent live and how long does it take them to get to work? Because the longer the commute, you know, presumably the more challenging work-life balance becomes over the long term. And so that becomes a factor of attraction and retention for your talent. And then this one was another interesting analysis for a client that was looking for a location to expand into on the West Coast somewhere, and had very specific criteria that we were able to measure and rank and ultimately help them get to a short list of 2 different market options. But what we did, and you can see here, there are ways to weight the criteria similar to that spreadsheet that we shared earlier. They needed to be within a day's drive of both San Francisco and San Diego. They needed to have access to blue collar talent pool. And so thinking about, and they wanted to be in a business friendly environment as well. So thinking about all of those, we played around with the weightings to kind of see what the different shift in market results would be. And then when we got to, you know, the top 2 to 3 that really aligned with what they were trying to do with their business, we ended up then going in and doing a deeper dive for Fresno and Bakersfield, and getting into the opportunities on the ground there from a real estate perspective, and then ultimately touring the market, and then they would execute on a real estate decision.
I think these are just a couple of examples of really some of the value that we try to bring to our clients in the upfront strategy and planning session, which is, you know, markedly different from, you know, the historical mandate of a lot of real estate firms, where it's, the clients pull together their requirements, you know, there's a phone call made to the brokerage team and say, okay, you know, go ahead and find it. So as this process gets more and more scientific, we're trying to aid on the front end. And, you know, we're finding that real estate is really much more of a holistic business decision now than it has been in the past. And, you know, we've demonstrated here that, you know, we have the ability to do this on really sort of a macro, a macro area across the country through, you know, the greater metros all the way down to the counties. And, you know, then if you decide that if you do like a particular metro area, you know, we can get into sort of the nuances of a South Station versus, Austin Brighton, or a Burlington versus a Needham for our local folks on the phone. So that's really the goal here. And like I mentioned earlier, to try to put data behind some of these assumptions. And sometimes it illuminates things that we already knew. And sometimes the data, bears, some information that we hadn't really considered or hadn't been able to quantify. So that's one of the ways that we're really trying to get ahead of sort of putting our clients in the better position from a business standpoint. And then we're going to pivot slightly here into another tool of ours that we call the 330-300 tool. And it's a really sort of simple concept that we wanted to share with you. And it basically takes sort of the idea of real estate productivity through and looking at it through the lens of what your different costs are as an organization. So this tool is definitely applicable for, you know, most organizations that don't have a heavy, you know, research or R&D type budget. But essentially the concept is that, you know, in most markets, you'll pay anywhere from, you know, $2 to $4, or in this case, $3 for your utilities. So your lights and plugs, you know, et cetera. Your real estate rent might be about $30 a foot, but your human capital cost is $300 a foot. And you'll see as we walk through it, you know, in this particular market, it varies, but 300 is a little catchier, but we'll walk through the calculator and the importance of this effort.
So I have a couple of questions before you move on to this tool. So are you offering these as additional fee revenue propositions in order to make more money, or are you including these to actually get the business of the final sale away from your competitor?
So that's a great question. Everything that we've showed you today is at no cost to our clients.
Wow.
I've ever hired, you know, brokers in the past. You'll know that we typically get paid fees when transactions happen. So when you buy a building, that's typically how we get paid, and you hire us to represent and, you know, advise you on your best interest, and you don't pay us. And as the decision-making landscape has gotten more and more complex, and our business has had to try to keep up, to create more value, to drive more value for our clients. So that's one of the nice things about being part of a big global firm like JLL is, we have the resources and the wherewithal to invest in some of these tools. And you'll notice that Julia's title is research, and within part of the capacity of her job, she puts out her and her team, some outstanding research reports. But increasingly, that role has evolved where, she's really helping us on the front end. And a lot of what we've talked through today are really very similar to what a kickoff call would be for a client from a diagnostic standpoint, trying to understand what those decision drivers are for our clients, and then actually running the analysis. So we've really tried to, here at JLL, to up our game, to provide, additional, more sort of holistic site selection services. And that's one of the reasons that we've, created the tools, and we free of charge for our clients when we get hired on an engagement.
So I actually have two more questions then, because that was a great answer. So how good are your biz dev teams at using this stuff to get clients? Like, because I worked for Forrester Research and I worked for their consulting group. Some biz dev people were so good at getting us business by using all these tools and capabilities and saying, you're going to pick the right place because we have this. And then others just thought it was a real estate transaction, right? So is it almost like training the business development sales team to like use this to their benefit, or are they so happy to have this stuff they just going crazy?
It's a very thoughtful question. I think that it kind of depends on what the particular client's need is and who our audience is. So I think in our firm, just like any other firm, you have, folks of different age and backgrounds and viewpoints. What we found this technology is really resonates with are the technology and life science industries. And particularly, you tend to have very progressive, sharp thinkers that are very analytical. Think of scientists, for example. Everything scientists do is predicated upon data. They live in a world of numbers and hypothesis and in data, frankly. And the tech side is really no different. So I think for our clients, especially in those two fields, we've taken, I keep using the word analog, but we've taken kind of an old school approach to solving a problem. And we're now sort of speaking their language, or at the very least, we're now providing numbers behind assumptions. And I think for a lot of folks within those two industries, and Julia, please cut me off if you want to add here. I think that really resonates. We find that those particular verticals do tend to use the technology. Now, what
about retail with franchises, or does your group specialize in office space and not retail franchise expansion?
So that's a great question. Candidly, my area of focus and really the Boston office's area of focus is really heavy office space, R&D, and life science, wet lab, GMP. Our retail group, I think, has some different tools that I can let Julia cut me off on and kind of explain how they work. But I think we found in this particular business that you really can't be a generalist. I can't be doing I can't be doing a retail transaction Orlando, Florida one day and then doing a life science transaction in Watertown the next. So we really need to be narrow-minded and or narrow-focused and specialists to really create good outcomes for our clients. So we're a huge company that has a variety of different specialists, but me personally, and I'm based in Boston. I do the bulk of my transactions here, or our clients are here and we help them in those other markets, but we loop other people into the process. So did I miss anything, Julia?
No, the only thing, I think you nailed it spot on. We do have a lot of great specialists as it relates to retail. We utilize a lot of mapping. One, to understand, that becomes a little bit different, locating a retail location and making sure that you're not going into a saturated market. So we do a lot of mapping to understand what are all the different retailers in the area. We also do a lot of demographic analysis and utilize what we call tapestries to understand what is the, what are the predominant demographic kind of characteristics of this area, and does it make sense for this retailer to locate here versus another area based on the product they're trying to sell. So it does get into a lot of different types of analytics. Retailers, they're looking at demographics for personal consumption purposes. Office occupiers are looking at demographics and talent for business growth and continuity. So it is very interesting, and we even evolved that into our retail sector, our supply chain logistics, looking at transportation nodes and looking at the connection points across markets for distribution purposes. So it really does get specialized depending on what you're looking for.
Thank you, Julia. So I'm going to start up through this concept of 330-300, and we certainly have some time after we walk through this tool to answer any questions. So if I jumped in before anyone was able to raise their hand, please hang tight. We'll certainly get to you in a minute. So as I was saying, as it relates to 330-300, so now we've sort of gone through the exercise of trying to quantify all your different costs, where you should be, where the talent is, how much it costs, et cetera. But what we found is over the last 5 to 10 years, our clients are increasingly focused on productivity and well-being of their clients. And if you were to pick up the Boston Business Journal within the last 2 years, you'd read and maybe sort of smirk at beer taps and ping pong tables and a lot of these like-minded companies all investing heavy dollars into their space and into their workplace to try to bring people into the office, retain those key employees, recruit more employees. But it ultimately comes down to one thing, which is really production of their employees. And so we at JLL tried to figure out a way of how can we look at this at a high level and integrate this into our real estate decision making. So what we've done is over the past few years go and try to quantify different elements of productive workspaces. So we're going to breeze through this kind of quickly, and then we'll show you how it applies in the tool. But we'll start with lighting and daylight. So it seems fairly obvious, but it's true. Lighting and the quality of lighting has a material impact on the comfort, mood, health, and safety of employees in the workspace. If you have access to bright light, if you can see out the window, if your workspace is lighter, brighter, and warmer, that does translate into productivity. And our workplace team has been able to quantify that. And we believe that the right light over flat light or negative light could yield up to 18% in increased productivity. And so we're going to throw a couple different percentages at you as we walk through this, and then you'll see where we're going with this. So the other one, which is really one of the biggest complaints that we hear as tenant rep brokers on tour, is quality of HVAC, especially in a market like Boston where construction pricing is so high, and in many cases rents are well below replacement cost. You have a lot of older buildings with older HVAC, and that could result in hot areas of hot air, areas of cool air. In some buildings that aren't even properly maintained with proper filters, it may not necessarily even be clean air. And that all translates into the employee experience. So, making sure that there are clean air at, and that the air itself is comfortable temperature has a significant impact on, the well-being of your employees and their experience while they're at work. So, our workplace folks have said that in the right situations, you can actually increase your cognitive functioning by up to 100% in some particular buildings. But it's certainly something that everyone, when you are touring space, and we're referring to office space here, should keep in the back of your head, with respect to, the HVAC. It's one of those quiet things that you don't necessarily see, but it is there, and it's often an afterthought when people are undergoing a site search.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Just a quick question. Do you see any impact right now because of the virus on that particular HVAC issue? Because at the school that I teach at, they really gone through the revamping of all the air and the air filtration. I was wondering whether you see the same trend up in Boston.
Do you want to take this one, Julia?
Sorry, I was on mute. This is an interesting topic, and it's still a little bit early as it relates to, how this will impact longer term trends. But so far, in having connections into great area universities and lots of scientists and epidemiologists, they are talking about the most important factor in a building right now is just having clean air. And, I think that it's funny, this is a complete sidebar, but I was watching Back to the Future with my kids over the weekend. They go back to the 50s, and there's an advertisement over a movie theater that they have air conditioning. And I think that what we will see coming out of this is buildings start to promote like an air quality score. It certainly hasn't happened yet, but I could see, similar to like a LEED rated building or an Energy Star rated building, that you suddenly got like a fresh air rating for your building. So I don't know if that got to your specific question, but those are kind of.
I think it did. It's kind of still in limbo somewhat, although some areas are moving a little bit faster than others.
It's really a good
Yes.
question. And what we're seeing out of some of our clients is, folks want to make sure that, the air is being properly cycled, that, the filters are not only, being changed, but being changed at regular intervals. It's a major component of, the health and well-being, the era that we're in. And, we don't try to pretend to be epidemiologists or sort of prognosticate on any of the science, but I think you've seen, over the last few months, the world seems to be getting a little bit smarter about the passage of COVID-19 through air relative to, touching, surfaces or other people, which seem to be more of the focus at the outset of the pandemic. So I think the answer is that it's certainly important. I think the real estate industry, like everybody, is certainly trying to get their arms around the best way to handle this. I think there are more questions than there are answers. There's certainly some best practices that we're seeing, and that our property management arm is trying to roll out into the hundreds of millions of square feet that JLL manages. But I don't think there's sort of one panacea or one sort of standard yet. Hopefully we get to that point sooner than later, where there sort of is a proven plan or protocol that everyone can adhere to. But we're still a little bit in the great unknown there. So it's a great question. And, if we were to have this presentation in 6 months, we'd probably be able to give you a better answer. That's really where we are, at least from our standpoint. So,
well, thank you for the answer, though.
Yep. So we touched a little bit on thermal comfort here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that, and I'm also not going to spend too much time on biophilia and views and aesthetics as we get a little bit farther down there. But I think we're more or less just trying to reinforce the message of having an attractive quality workplace where people feel like they're proud to work, that's clean and attractive. So this is the big one, and I'm actually going to let Julia handle this because she's really much more well-versed than I am when it comes to location and commuting strategy.
Yeah, so, you know, we shared that example of a commute analysis, but this one has really emerged as a critical decision-making factor for location. And so, you know, one of the things that we highlight is just the impact to productivity and the impact to, you know, just making the location accessible, and, you know, how that enables your workforce over the long term. And it involves a lot of different considerations. If you're a suburban location, do you have easy access from the highway, or do you have to drive through a lot of small streets in a small town to get to your location? Or if you are in an urban environment, do you have easy access to public transportation, or is it walkable? So there are a lot of different ways to think about it depending on the location and the needs. But you know, as it relates to, I think, the current topic of conversation for a lot of people, you know, how far are you from home if you have childcare concerns? Do you have access to childcare nearby, or do you have a long commute to get home? That's going to become critical. I think we're starting to hear of the importance and the value of that from many more employers before this, and certainly the current situation that all these working parents have been working through has really heightened that and its importance.
Excellent. So now we're going to talk about interior layout and active design, and essentially what this statistic really means is thoughtfully designed space, where you have the ability to work in different areas depending on what your project is. Do you need a quiet area to concentrate? Would you like a collaboration area where you can collaborate with your employees? You know, trying to make sure that you have the right floor plan and making sure that people are comfortable in the scenario in which they work is really important to employee turnover, which you'll see when we get to the calculator has a material impact on your bottom line. You know, partly it's a function of the type of work, you know, your employees are doing. You know, it could be a function of, you know, the personalities and preferences of your employees. You know, one of the little bit of a sidebar here, one of the sort of the big aha moments of sort of the evolution of the open plan work environment over the last few years is that not everybody thrives, and every business unit or group within a company thrives within an open environment. You know, for example, you know, engineering or, you know, creative types or marketing might like sitting next to one another or in little pods where they can exchange sort of a free-flowing conversation of ideas. Whereas, you know, finance and accounting folks that have their head down, that are trying to make sure that, you know, that their numbers are correct, might actually be bothered by, you know, ambient noise around them. So, you know, sort of trying to determine what sort of that one size, realizing that one size fits all is not really the appropriate way to maximize productivity in a lot of your employees has really kind of come to bear as a lot of companies have gone denser in their layouts and have kind of eliminated, you know, some of those quiet areas or not provided adequate breakout area or collaboration space. And that's been was a big sea change in terms of how space was being designed, you know, call it pre-COVID. And getting that wrong has an impact on employee turnover. So this is kind of an interesting stat. We'll breeze through this quickly, but you know, our internal research found that 41% of job seekers base their decision on whether they take or don't take a job on, you know, the physical workspace or the appearance of the physical workspace. And there might be a lot of reasons for that. You know, it could be just sort of the pure attractiveness of it. It could be, you know, what this workplace says about the employer. You know, do they care about, you know, providing their employees with an attractive workspace that's welcoming and a good place for them to work. It shows what type of environment they want to showcase to the clients when they come through, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then we kind of touched on noise and acoustics when we were talking about layout and active design, but you know, noise is increasingly become a problem in a lot of these open environments. And in some cases, going back to sort of the finance and accounting you know, discussion, if you walk into some floors that have, you know, heavy areas of folks that are trying to concentrate, you'll notice that a lot of the professionals and the employees wear headphones. So, you know, an environment that it was supposed to foster free-flowing conversation and collaboration might result in communication via email or Slack or Microsoft Teams, rather than, you know, picking their head up and, you know, saying something to, you know, the person who sits 4 or 5 seats down. So there's been some unintended consequences, and noise and acoustics certainly factors into employee productivity and happiness. So we've now thrown a lot at you. We've given you the concept of the 3 different costs in this model: your utilities, your rent, and your human capital. So now you're probably thinking, okay, we have a lot of stats. We've heard, you know, a couple of examples. Why is this important? How is this relevant? So I'm going to show you. So we're going to try to use some examples for, call it, averages in Greater Boston. So we're going to call it $3 per square foot in utilities. We're going to move the rental cost to 45 to kind of blend from, call it, higher end in the suburbs and certainly on the low end in Boston. We're going to use an example of 50,000 square feet. So call it a mid to larger size tenant in the market. And we're going to say that that particular tenant has 300 employees in their space. And we're also going to say that this is a sort of a new world type company, say technology, where they have some fairly highly paid employees. So perhaps they've got a huge amount of software engineers that they're paying in the low 6 figures, you know, not to mention executives and support and sales and marketing, all of whom are pretty well compensated. We're also going to make an estimate that 15% or an additional 15% of their compensation comes by the way of benefits. And it's typically just to mention in this part of the conversation with our client that we're not going to make assumptions here. Increasingly, HR folks have a seat at the table as part of these discussions. And we find that the HR team, you know, if they don't know this information, they can get it pretty quickly and they're able to plug in actuals. And then we're going to use the attrition rate, right? So fairly straightforward, you know, what's the turnover of your employees? And HR typically also has or is able to account for the amount of sick time that their employees take. So we're going to plug all this in. And we're going to see in Boston that the 330-300 calculator is actually the 345-690 calculator. So what does all this mean? So over the last 5 to 10 minutes, we've given you a bunch of information about the myriad of factors that impact you know, workspace conditions and you know, the happiness, the health, the well-being, and just general comfort levels of employees. So in this particular model, we have all the data here. So one of the things that we're hearing a lot about in COVID right now is, well, you know, talk to me about density. Do I need to, for example, take more space because I need more space within our employees? So we're at a fairly contemporary, new world, fairly open plan type density at 167 square feet per employee. What if we decide that we're going to push that to 200 square feet? So by doing that, by giving your employees a little bit of breathing room, that's going to cost you, in this particular scenario, just under $8 a foot, or about $465,000 a year. So pretty significant money, right? Now, what if we, when we're comparing buildings, we looked at a Class A building and a Class B building, and the Class A building has brand new HVAC, you know, has a you know, better window line, is closer to public transit, checks a lot of those boxes, you know, that we just talked about. And we just increased productivity just 3% a year. That alone equates to a savings of about $1 million or 20 bucks a foot. So why this is relevant is, we'll go back to that Class A and Class B building example. If you're looking at a Class A building at, you know, $46, $47 a foot, and a Class B building at, you know, $41, $42 a foot, from a holistic cost standpoint, you're better off spending a little bit more money on the nicer building because it's going to get paid back to you over time in productivity. And we'll just, I'm going through this quickly so we have some time for questions, but, you know, same thing with sick days and also attrition. So if we were able just to cut sick days, for example, by 15%, that alone could be a savings to the bottom line of, you know, $200,000 a year. Same thing with attrition. You have some very highly paid employees that take a long time to be trained. If you can cut attrition by 15%, that's a saving of about $1 million a year. So now all of a sudden the pool, the pool and the beer kegs and, a lot of the things that we kind of roll our eyes on kind of make sense. It's like, okay, if, my existing employees want to stay and I can recruit more people, maybe it does make sense to spend a little bit of money on, in an area where our employees can congregate and get to know each other and spend a little bit of time. So, so that's more or less it in terms of the 300 calculator, but the concept here is just to try to quantify the productivity discussion in the context of real estate, because hopefully if you got anything out of the last 45 minutes, you realize that we're really trying to advise our clients to look at the entire picture. Real estate is not as simple as years of lease term, months of free rent, annual escalations and rent per square foot. It's a whole summation of understanding location strategy, understanding your employees, and then once you sort of begin to execute that strategy, really making sure that you're being thoughtful with a proper eye to a lot of these small things that might not necessarily appear obvious at the surface, but are important over the duration of your occupancy. So, that in a nutshell is some tools that we here at JLL have to try to help our clients. And we have about 5 minutes left and would love to hear and answer any questions that you may have.
So Simon, Julia, we're saying that was fascinating. I enjoyed that. Now, so how often does somebody go through this? Is it greenfield kind of scenario? Hey, we need new people somewhere, or is it, hey, I'm going to move from my current location to somewhere else, or is it I've got a new project and I need to be close to a certain whatever, I might and. Also bear in mind that we're very internationally focused. So do you do this in other countries also, or you do it for people coming from other countries into the US?
So I'll answer the first question first, and then I'll let Julia speak to internationally. We've shown you two tools and two processes here. Sometimes we use both. Sometimes we use one or the other. I think we find on sort of the front end with a lot of the macro location strategies, one of two things happens. One, a client is running into a particular roadblock. We'll go back to that fintech in San Francisco. Labor is just so expensive. Their employees can't find housing. The real estate costs are just irrational. And where else could we do this? Another scenario that we might have is, a big company says, we're paying an awful lot of money to be in a metro like New York City or Los Angeles, and we need to find a lower cost alternative for a call center function. Or we're thinking about potentially, relocating our finance and accounting or our marketing divisions. JLL team, could we do this? And if we could do it, let's model out, what some of those cost savings are. Or the third option could be, like you referenced, a company, could be headquartered in, Barcelona and says, it's time to expand into the United States. Where's really the best location that fits our criteria to open up our U.S. center of operations? So, and there could certainly be more, but that's typically the context in that we typically use the first, the labor analytics tools that we were talking about. And then with respect to 300, that typically tends to be a more local conversation where sort of direction of a requirement or real estate strategy leading up to a lease expiration may come into play. Oftentimes you have different, ideas at the table. A CEO may have a different vision for what a CFO wants. Certainly the chief human resource officer will have a different opinion on that. And, the 300 calculator, kind of level sets, some of those expectations and kind of takes sort of some gut and feel out of the discussion. So as you can probably expect, the human resource folks love it. Certainly the CFOs like it as well, but it helps crystallize some of those conversations. And I'll kick it to Julia so she can talk about some of our international capabilities.
Yeah, it's when we do more of like a global portfolio or location strategy, we will incorporate different, depending on the requirement and what's needed, we'll incorporate different groups. We have what's called the international desk, and they really help play a liaison between the home country and the other countries that we're exploring. And then we also have consulting teams that really help to get into the various factors that would dictate, different location decisions for global expansion, whether it be economic incentives or country customs and ways of doing business. So we incorporate we put together the best team to approach each different requirement, understanding that the data is different in each market from a research perspective when I play a role in these, and there are different levels of transparency in each country. But we do try to replicate a lot of the same practices and analytical exercises that we've shared with you. They just look a little bit different country to country.
Awesome. Well, I know that we're at the hour and we've taken up a lot of your time already. Are there any other questions, guys and girls?
Yeah, I have one question in particular. If you'd like to share this with me, I teach statistics at NYU. What data sources do you use to get some of the, let's call it employment data, cross data, et cetera?
Yeah, so we have a variety of different resources for data. For employment, we largely use BLS data, but we do use some unique kind of, I don't know the correct technical term, but we use a company called MZ that can pull out data based on unique job postings. So you can see what different types of requirements are based on geography. For demographic data, we use Esri, and which largely pulls from the US Census. And for commute studies, we will utilize, I think it's Google's drive time calculators that then pairs with the employee data that's provided by our clients.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do your clients ask about, hey, we need a building or we need a location in a month or in 6 months, but what will the location look like in 10 years? I mean, how much future casting is involved in this? And I'm thinking about, if you come to a city, are they going to add a new bus stop? Are they going to add a new subway station? And now you're moving into the world of flying cars, right? Where does that fit into the equation?
We do field a lot of those questions, primarily when we're seeing our clients contemplate what's potentially a newer neighborhood. There's been a lot of urbanization over the past 10 years, and as a result of that, we've seen a lot of new urban neighborhoods kind of infill, and I think have grown in popularity from like entertainment and lifestyle perspective, but sometimes from a workforce perspective are still proving out the validity of those. So in those cases, we will show what does the future of development look like, and we can draw those in maps to see how over, let's say a decade, it will fill in with proposed office and, multifamily developments. And then for, on the investor client side, we will also start to, paint that longer term vision of if you're going to develop a building in a certain area, what will it look over time, and do the demand drivers from a talent and demographics perspective support those assumptions.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you hear that many people, the case study you cited, think that Silicon Valley is too expensive, and then you hear that other areas are attracting a lot of people because they're trying to get away from Silicon Valley. And the two areas that I hear about a lot are typically Denver, Colorado area, and then Austin, Texas, right? So what happens in 10 years time if people move there? How who's tracking how your, what you call it, 330, 300, how does that change?
To be candid, I think that's the $1 million question. And as much as we do like to forecast based on our models, we also don't try to, sort of step out on footing that we're not sure of. So while we may have some opinions, how things could break one way or another, we also don't try to sort of extend beyond our capabilities to give kind of data-based or factual based type advice. So I think that's one of the nice things about a JLL, where because we're such a large company and each individual metro area has a really deep bench of a variety of producers. I mean, just in the Boston office here that cover call it the Greater Boston Metro, I think we have about 65 licensed brokers and people that have been working these markets for their whole careers. So while it's hard to really predict, people that live in and day out in those leasing and investment sales areas generally have a pretty good feel for how they think the future may play out. So I would say that kind of heads towards offering an opinion rather than sort of a data-based recommendation. So we can do that, but one of the things that Julia and her team do exceptionally well is garner an amazing amount of data and sort of synthesize it into an opinion or a deliverable or a narrative. And when we start sort of prognosticating about what the future looks like, if we don't have sort of data behind some of our forecasting information, it's kind of hard to do. But it's a great question. I think a lot of the models of people that have tried to forecast 3, 5, and 7 years out for a lot of these cities, aren't particularly on base. So very difficult to do, but we're often happy to provide an opinion.
Let me say thank you. I enjoyed this. This is pretty good.
Welcome.
Yep. Thank you, Sam. Really, really appreciate it. You taking the time with Julia to show us what you can do. I wanted to bring this to the group because when you first told me about it, I had no clue that this kind of analytics was being done and how people could use it. So really appreciate you sharing with us.
Thank you for having us, Simon.
Okay. Well, we're a bit past the hour. I've got a slide to share with the Boston chapter. So Sam and Julia, we can let you go unless you're desperately interested to see what we're up to next.
And you're welcome, as Peter said, you're welcome to join.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having us.
Make some dinner, but thank you for having us. It was great to have the conversation.
It was. Thank you, guys.
Nice to meet everyone, and thank you for having us. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, so I'm just going to share my screen. This is super quick, everyone. So don't worry, you're not getting a giant presentation. Just a slow computer, apparently. All right. So as you know, we haven't had many meetings lately. So I wanted to bring you up to date on where we're up to. So this was me when Fred coerced me into taking the chapter chair. Like, oh no, what do I do next? But helpfully, Babs and Jim Means have stepped up to help me out. I really appreciate them taking the time to do that. We've had our first call. We've got to bounce some ideas around what we can do, especially in this virtual world. I think Jim, if he's still on the line, he was actually working on putting together a face-to-face event, which he says he's done before. So we're going to keep working on that to put some ideas together for you. What we have committed is that we're going to meet the third Wednesday of every month at 4 o'clock, so that we can all put that in our calendars, regular as clockwork. That's when we will get together. So we can allocate that time ahead of time. So the next meeting on that timetable would be 16th of September. We're going to have a meet the members because frankly we haven't really talked about each other much lately. We'll start with Babs, who's a new joiner. She can tell us a little about herself so that we get to know her. And then the idea was to have 1 or 2 other people talk about something that they've been working on, a project that they've been working on, a problem that they've got, and they would like to bring to the group to get ideas on how to solve it. It's only when you kind of float something up there that people have a bunch of thoughts about what you can do to, or who potentially could help you. And then for the remainder of the year, those will be the dates for the other meetings. And as I said, Jim, Babs and I are working on plans for what they will look like. In other sort of items to update you with, we've got a career development open clinic, which is now running every 2 weeks. So the next one is this Thursday, if you've seen the notices, and it's literally an open clinic for anyone who wants to come and talk about anything to do with their career development, whether it be their LinkedIn profile, whether they're in transition and need, they just need some help, whether they want to practice their elevator pitch, whatever it is. Come to that group and you can hear what other people are doing, and it's a forum to test whatever it is you need amongst friends, make the mistakes there, and then take the finished article into the outside world. So that's with myself, Betty, who's on this call, Tiffany, who's our resume expert, and John Lowe, for those of you who've met John before. And finally, Peter, our newsletter coordinator, is always looking for contributions. So even if it's just a paragraph, an update on yourself, a piece of news, an interesting article, anything that you think is worth sharing, please get that to Peter. Peter, I believe your next deadline is this Friday, is that right?
Yes, it's what I call the first deadline. There's always one that goes a little later than that, but I'd like to get it in this Friday so I can work on it over the weekend, so to speak, and get it out sometime next week. But I was going to ask you, Simon, I kind of like your Boston chapter update, the way you put that together. Would you consider just writing a short blurb on it, and I'll give it all the publicity it needs?
So this slide here, Peter, is that what you're referring to?
True, but it needs to be reformatted, so to speak.
Of course, yeah. But the content.
Yeah,
the content.
But the content and the message, because I think it's a great one that it's out there this way, because people will know, and frankly, maybe some of the other chapter chairs, including myself for the Connecticut, will pick up on this type of communication.
All right, I will do that. You'll get that. You'll get that this week, Peter.
Thank you so much, Simon.
And Wasim, as our, erstwhile chair, anything that you would like to add to the group?
I think this was excellent, Simon. I really enjoyed that discussion. In terms of adding something to the group, let me think. I think you've covered most things.
Okay.
I can't think of anything else. Now I know that where I'm going to be every third Wednesday of the month.
Great.
And I'm looking forward to, you said Jim was organizing an in-person. That should be good, right? I mean,
yeah, we've got to test that out a little bit, but we're certainly going to give it a try because it's only going to be a few months before it gets cold, and that's not going to work. So we're going to have a lash at it and see what we can do, because I think some people are just kind of desperate to actually see somebody in person in some way, shape, or form. And now that the traffic isn't quite as horrendous, it is kind of feasible and not desperately off-putting to go somewhere. So we'll have a go. Whether it really works is another thing, but we'll have a crack at it.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, look, thank you guys. I know we've run over a little bit, but I asked Sam just to put something quickly together, and he put together a far more professional presentation than I was expecting. So I hope you found that interesting. And if you've got people that you know who have something interesting like that, please let one of us know so that we can we can bring them in and ask them to do a little presentation. It doesn't need to be more than 30 minutes. Just give us a teaser about what they do and share some different ideas about how they go about being successful.
Well, I enjoyed being here. It's the first time in a long time that I attended a Boston meeting, and I think was nice.
Thank you, Peter. We loved having you.
Okay, I'm gonna say
with your
goodbye
seascape.
now. I got to go back to the beach.
All right.
Go. Life's a beach.
Exactly.
Bye bye.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.